Altbays. Altbays.
Altbays. Fabian solo. Was not expecting drums. Thank you. We're live. Altbays Show, brought to you by Altbays Ltd. This is our show number 157. Yay! Very nice. We have been doing 3 shows per week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And today, this week, we start doing every Tuesday and Thursday. So welcome. This is our new journey with Altbays, twice a week, bringing amazing, exciting people to have cool conversations, inspiring ones, funny ones, sad ones. Hopefully not tonight. We'll see. Michael's like, I don't know, man. We are a podcast platform, obviously, so you will find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and on YouTube. So if you are on YouTube right now, make sure to subscribe to our channel, okay? Our social medias keep growing, which is pretty cool. Thanks for your support. So we are on Facebook, we are on TikTok, and we are on Instagram. And now also you can find our team working on this beautiful thing here. Look. Is the Coral Mind magazine. If you are listening to us and you cannot see, I'm holding a beautiful, colorful magazine made by a bunch of cool people from the Coromando. Okay, it's a collaborative project. So if you would like to be in it, just send us a message. You can send a message to Altbays or hello@coralmind, COROMIND.NZ. Hey, cool. Especially if you want to advertise, that's even better. It's a free magazine, so we do appreciate our advertisers. It wouldn't be a thing without them. Thank you so much. On my left.
Yes, it's Fabian Roberts checking in. You didn't name me the first time in sort of 40 odd shows with me, so I'd like to just, Fitzyounger and the Coromando generally, please don't be too hard on yourselves that there's no longer enough of you left to validate a show being 3 times a week. It's not that you've failed or let us down. It's simply that there's room to improve. So if you have not been on the show, take a long, hard look at yourself and build up maybe a 3-year plan. Work your way to being interesting, skillful, or relevant for the first time in your life.
Michael is feeling great now. Look at him. He's like, well.
I'm glad I got in before the
Speaking
chastisement.
of someone that is relevant.
We might as well bring Michael to the conversation, man.
Yeah, I was going to say, shout out to Taylor. That was a really epic sound effect. Has that always been there? I've never heard it. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, man. You usually don't like them. So I think we slowly melting your eyes, heart, like piece by piece.
The dissonance, the discordance really struck me. So I'll keep that one.
Cool. Can you please introduce our guest tonight, Fabian?
Michael Ewing is across from us, and I'm going to ask him to tell us who the heck he is, because I know him a bit through school, but I think people are sick of me talking about school. So who are you, buddy?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me. Appreciate the invite.
Welcome.
So I'm Michael Ewing. I am an educator, been in education for about a decade or so, and before that in retail, and before that at school.
Going to pause there, rewind. Retail, what did you sell?
Before you do that, Mr. Roberts.
Can I just interrupt you?
Because sometimes I forget to do very important things. I just want to say thank you to Blue Ginger for bringing us dinner tonight.
It's bloody good. Kapow chicken.
Did you like the meal?
I love it. I always get the under eye sweats, but I love kapow chicken. Went there recently. Blue Ginger, not only amazing dinner menu now, they've got a dessert menu. Yeah.
Shout out to Blue Ginger.
Affogato, delicious.
So if you are coming to the Coromando, now we need more than ever beautiful tourists coming and supporting our area. Make sure to go to Blue Ginger and appreciate their amazing Thai fusion, awesome cuisine. Did you like the meal, Michael?
Yeah, delicious.
So that's how the show goes. Every time you get mid-sentence, we're just going to shove in an advertisement.
And Michael was pretty humble about talking about himself. So if you don't mind, Can I read it?
Yeah,
a
go
little
for
bit
it.
of what you
I
sent
got a
to me.
bio.
Oh yeah, man. So Michael is the CEO of Peninsula Community Trust and director of Good Tutors Ltd. His career in education has included being deputy principal of Whenuakite School, and Michael has worked as a teacher in several other schools, including Mercury Bay Area School. In 2021, Michael left Whenuakite School to study towards his Masters of Education, and at the beginning of 2022, Michael helped found Network Church and Peninsula Community Trust. Michael has an interest in improving access to quality education for our community. So in January this year, Peninsula Community Trust started Good Tutors. Michael lives in the beautiful Whitianga with his family, which is amazing. A lot of things going on, man.
Yeah, it's busy.
How is this thing with a master's in education?
Hold up. You can't start talking about masters. He worked in retail.
We'll get there. I'm just curious about masters.
No, I want to know what he sold. Shut up.
You want the whole story,
I
do
want to
you?
know what you sold. I can't picture you being a salesperson.
Yeah, I know. Go figure. Yeah, so, all right. I joined Harvey Norman as a salesperson when I was about, 15, 16, and worked there part-time. And then I think I was 17, and the proprietor of the store, he and I had a conversation that involved me leaving school. And I said, all right, well, you train me into management and I'll leave. And so he said, yes, and I left. And what I didn't realize is I was working at Harvey Norman on the North Shore, and I just started in the small appliances section. So, toasters, vacuum cleaners, what have you. And I really wanted to get into the hi-fi area, TVs and things. And so that was kind of the agreement. And the guy that was leading that division, he got his own store. So he got a promotion. I think I'd been working there full time for about 6 months. So the proprietor basically took this huge chance on me and decided to give me leadership of that whole division. So I was 17 and looking after a dozen salespeople, and probably indirectly responsible for 40 other staff. And so, it was a pretty massive thing, big learning curve. But that's the story of retail.
How would you feel about having a 17-year-old as a boss?
Oh, look, it was a terrible decision. I wouldn't have given it to me. I mean, I can't say I did a fantastic job, but I learned a heck of a lot. It's one of those things, you do something for a while, and then a lot of the learning comes later after you've left as well. So, you're sitting there 5 years later and reflecting on the different experiences you've had, and you're continuing to learn. So
every time you then diss the vacuum cleaner, iron kids, iron salespeople, as part of the hi-fi team, the jockeys, wearing blazers and shit. I'm just trying to picture that. I've never thought about that. Next time I go to Harvey Norman or any big sort of shop, I'm going to look around at the losers that are selling that. You're going to sell a washing machine? Have fun, bro.
No, sales is an interesting thing. I mean, some people, it's one of the most highly paid jobs in the world if you're good at it. I mean, you think about the people that sell super yachts, they make a fortune. So it's a valid career, but working in a retail store, I don't know if you'd want to end up retired there necessarily, but it's a good stepping stone when you're young, I think.
So what are the cool things that you learned along the way that really helped you with your salesman pitch or like?
Oh, well, it's people skills. It's how do you talk to people? I mean, you've got to understand that in retail, you have every single kind of person in the world coming through the doors, and you have to learn to communicate with all of them. So, you have very wealthy individuals coming in, you have people that have a modest budget coming in, and you have some bizarre people coming in, and you work with some bizarre people. And so, you have to learn to get on with all kinds of people. And then, being in management, I had a fair bit to do with customer service. So, someone would come in that was upset and they get sent my way. You'd have to figure out, okay, well, how do you handle this situation so that the store retains a customer, so that the customer leaves happy, so that you're not getting ripped off as a store. You know, there's a lot that goes into it. So
You don't want those bad reviews, eh?
Well, I suppose when you started, there were probably no bad reviews except a newspaper column or something, right?
yeah, so I think I left school 2004.
So social media was very young.
Yeah, Facebook was fledgling.
And how did we go? Was it a moment that, when was the moment that you decided to tap into education? Was it something like straight after that job where you said, I want to get them?
No,
Sorry, I'm just trying to picture that.
man.
None of these people buying shit know anything. You know what? I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to teach people to read their
I'm
own
gonna teach
pamphlets.
them.
Or
Yes.
I think one of the things I enjoyed the most in retail was, and being in management and leadership, was the training that took place. You know, I'd have a lot to do with suppliers, and you'd get new products in, and you'd need to train the staff. These are the features and the benefits, and so on and so forth. But I enjoyed helping people. Helping people choose a product, helping people figure out what was best for them. And I think it was that that was the key for me that sort of sent me on the pathway to education. It was like, okay, well, this is what's most satisfying to me is that aspect of the job. So teaching, it seemed like a natural progression from there.
so you've moved on from retail and had a decade career. Do you still sort of walk into a shop from now on going, nah, that's shit? You go, buy that, and you sort of give your friends advice on what to buy because you know what the sales gimmicks are or what the data actually means?
Yeah, well, for a long time after leaving retail, you had a bit of inside information about brands that were good and brands that weren't so good, but everything's different now. I mean, I go into a retail store today and it's totally different. And all the products have advanced so much. I mean, whiteware's probably more or less the same, an oven's an oven, but TVs, there weren't smart TVs. When I started, I remember Pioneer was making plasma screen TVs, and they had like a 50-inch plasma screen, right? It was about, 10, 15 centimeters thick. It was huge. It was a beast. And 50-inch was a big screen back then. I think it retailed for $20,000. So, and that wasn't the most expensive item. I mean, I remember they had I think it was like a 65 inch LCD screen. I think it might have been a JVC, and that thing was about $70,000. So, now you can get something like that for what, a few thousand?
If you go on the right Facebook group, you get it for free. People getting rid of it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Do you keep up with technology? Like, are you fresh with what's happening?
Not really.
Well, you've got a Tesla, right? I suppose that's one of the pinnacles of technology at the moment.
Yeah, it's a rocket ship.
Did retail sort of experience, did you sort of have the idea of you looked at Teslas and you could read through the manual and go, yeah, this is a quality product, or what made that transition happen?
No, I wouldn't say I brought a Tesla because of my retail career, but they seem to me like pretty cool cars. And I remember talking to Jacinda, this is before the war in Ukraine broke out, and I was looking at all the money that the government was borrowing to fund all their COVID-related activities, and I said to Jacinda, I said, inflation, it's coming, it's going to go through the roof. I said, fuel's going to be expensive. We should consider getting an electric car. So I jumped online, and that was, believe it or not, the cheapest electric car that wasn't a piece of junk that I could find. And, I think it's about, we've worked out it's about 5 or 6 times cheaper to run than a petrol equivalent. So
what makes it not great, an electric car? What gets in the way? Because you said, we looked at these ones that were not great. What was your threshold? Like, what were you looking for?
Yeah, so one of the things that Tesla cars have is they've got an active cooling system for the battery. And what that means is that if the temperature outside is too hot or too cold, the car will kick in and adjust the temperature of the battery so that it doesn't overheat or get too cold, and that significantly increases the lifespan of the battery. And so I think when my car was new, it had a range of about 440 kilometers. And obviously they degrade over time, you lose range. And so now it's doing about 370, but it's a 2014. If you have a look at an equivalent, I don't even know if they make Leafs that are 2014, but if you have a look at an old Leaf, it's probably gone through 2 or 3 batteries. The batteries, they just die very quickly. They start out with, I don't know what the range is, maybe a couple hundred kilometers, and then the more you charge it, the more range it loses. Before you know it, it's useless, because if you can't get from here to Auckland on a charge, it's a bit of a problem.
I think what makes it complicated, it's is the thing, like, people think that it's going to be the best thing in the world, the electric car, but like it's a transition time that we're going through now, right? That it's better than petrol. It's clearly better in my view. Still has its problems.
Have you driven one?
I haven't driven one. I have been in one, like with people driving.
Is this an offer?
Yeah.
Take you for a spin later.
No, I haven't. Is it like a massive difference on comfort?
It's easily the best car I've driven, and there's no comparison. I've owned, I don't know, 7 or 8 cars, so it's significantly better. And I think a big part of that is the power band, because there's no gear changes, right? You put your foot on the accelerator and it just goes, and so you have the torque all the way up the power band. You don't have those gear changes where it drops down. But the other thing is there's other things like active braking. So when you take your foot off the accelerator, I don't know, it must switch the polarity of the battery or something, and the motor slows the car down and charges the battery at the same time. So you can go from here to Auckland, or say from here to Hamilton or whatever, and you hardly ever touch the brake. So to slow down, you just take your foot off the accelerator slightly, the car slows down, put your foot back on the accelerator. So it's a very comfortable drive. You're not going back and forward between the brake and the accelerator.
You have a hybrid, right?
Hybrid? Yeah, I have 2 hybrids. We have a Honda Insight, 2011, I think, Honda Insight. It's very much, everyone thinks it's a Prius, Toyota Prius. It's the slightly less economical version of a Prius, but it's been great. It's half the cost of the petrol car we used to have. And then my wife's got a car now that's a Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross hybrid, and that's better again, because driving around the Coromandel and the work she does needs to be able to work in the middle of midnight. So big tyres, 4-wheel drive. The petrol does come in handy, especially if we go on holiday and it's a bit of a hassle trying to find a charging station, or we don't use the car much. Just don't bother bringing the cable. But the tank's big enough to get you anywhere, and the ability to recharge the battery when you're just coasting on the road. The battery will just start recharging when you're going straight, because it's not really straining in any way. I imagine there is a slight drain on the petrol while it charges, but it seems to work out much cheaper and get us a lot further.
Yeah, I think
electric, and that's a plug-in. So the non-plug-in hybrid and a plug-in hybrid, they're both so much cheaper. Yeah.
I think electric vehicles is definitely the way of the future. How long it takes for us to get there, I don't know. But I mean, you see there are all sorts of companies that are innovating in that space, not just with cars, but like with vertical takeoff and landing planes, for example. So like I'm invested in a company called Joby Aviation, and they're set to launch in 2025. But the idea is that you have an electric plane that has a pilot and 4 passengers, and it will take off vertically, travel, I think it's got a range of like 200 miles or something like that, and a top speed of, say 200 miles per hour. And so it's like a puddle jumper, right? You're not going to fly from one country to another, but if you want to go to Auckland, right, you jump in your electric plane and you just puddle hop over to the airport or to, the station up in Auckland. In fact, they've got like a deal with Uber, I think. They purchased Uber Elevate, and that's like an Uber Sky network. So the idea is, if you want to go to the movies, in Auckland. You jump on your Uber app, right? Put in your location, and Uber will collect you. Maybe not down here, but I don't know how well Uber operates down here. But an Uber will collect you, take you to the nearest, say, launch pad, jump in your electric plane, puddle hops you over to the next city, and Uber will pick you up from there and take you to your final destination. So, and they reckon they can get that at prices that are equivalent to an upmarket Uber. So I think they have their executive Ubers, which you pay a bit more for, Uber Black or something.
That will demand a whole new plan on traffic, right? Of course, because we're going to go for the air traffic, and it's going to be a new level because I don't think they're going to be as high as planes, but obviously somewhere in the middle.
And what movie is worth going to see in an airplane? Like, I'm trying to think, is there anything like Avatar? I haven't seen it. I wasn't looking forward to it. It's taken years to make. I know people who've worked on it. I still haven't watched it, but, you know, if the Lord of the Rings came out, Lord of the Rings 4, ooh, maybe that'd be cool. Maybe.
Well,
What movies, like, can you name a movie that, in history, that you would gone, yeah, I would have flown to see that when it came out?
No.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe a movie isn't the best example.
The ballet, Elton John, you go to a
How
rock
about a
concert.
wedding?
Woo!
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
Hopefully you've organised your transport before the day of for your wedding.
If you think about it, though, that it really is going to change the world that we live in, because, you know, up until now, if you want to work in the city, you have to live there. But what happens if you can live in the Coromandel and work in the city, and it's a 20-minute commute?
Barrier, yeah.
Well, especially when
You
we
need to
have
invest.
disasters like we just had with the roads, right? And suddenly we are quite isolated here, so that would make a lot of sense. My question for you, Michael, is like the way that it's evolving, like it's so fast and it's beautiful. Like I'm doing the exercise of seeing from different perspectives, not just, you know, bashing on things. So like it's amazing what we're doing as humans, isn't it? Like look like 20 years ago and you look at what we have now. It's incredible, but are we going to keep up with our education? Are humans going to be ready for all these like fast things? Because the thing is, what I see a lot is it's so fast that people don't know how to be patient anymore. People don't know how to be polite because you want it now. And you want it now because you
can have it now.
You can have it now. So you want it now. So like it doesn't matter if I'm in front of you waiting as well, but because it is possible to have it now. You know, like so how do we go about the human element there? It kind of links to something that I read that you were saying about like the hard copies that you teach. You know, you have the technology as an ally, but you still rely on, can I say old school methods or traditional methods? So I think we can kind of like put all these topics together.
Yeah, so put it this way. Digital technology is a tool and it's valuable and you can't take away from that. I mean, what you can do through a computer, through the internet is unbelievable. And, you know, people from 100 years ago couldn't even comprehend what we have access to in our hand today. However, as a child growing up, you know, we were of the generation where we didn't grow up with the internet until what? How old would you have
Teens?
been? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, maybe.
And
12.
until it became something that was regularly used, you know, we might have been, late teens. So, you know, we're taking it for granted that, you just use the internet, use digital technology to learn. But we know how to ask questions. We know what questions to ask. We can navigate our way through the internet easily to find what we're looking for, and we can comprehend what we're reading. Now, as a child, like an 8, 9, or 10-year-old, they've got access to everything. But do they know how to ask the right questions? Can a child find the right information, and then can they comprehend it? I mean, what's the average reading age of the internet? I don't know what it is, but let's say it's 14, 15 years old. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I suppose.
Okay, so for
unless you're on a scientific journal sort of website, it's
so
basic.
Yeah. So for the sake of the conversation, let's say that the average reading age of the internet was 15 years old. Okay. And we're asking 10-year-olds or 8-year-olds hey, we're going to do a inquiry. We're going to go and research this topic. Here's your list of things that you need to find out about and you need to answer these questions. All right, off you go. Well, a child needs to be explicitly taught how to ask an appropriate question that's going to lead them to the information that they need in order to answer that question well. And B, when they come across a site, it might have all the right answers, but it has a reading age that's 3, 4, 5 years above them. And so they find it difficult to understand, difficult to comprehend, right? And then what happens? They copy and paste. So the teachers are reading through, and of course the teacher knows. You're looking, okay, well, that's copy and paste off the internet. And so what does the teacher do? It's like, Johnny, you need to learn not to copy and paste. It's like, yeah, well, they don't have a choice because they can't even understand what they're reading, let alone rewrite it in their own words. So, to think about technology as a tool is fine, but we have to learn how to use it, first before we can use it well. And that's where I think, if we're going to do education with some kids, well, we've got textbooks. And it's like...
Can I just jump on that? So just a different way to phrase it, is it the kids need to learn the skills of asking questions, researching, answering, getting feedback, revising, before they try and do that on a device that will speed type for them. So the idea of like, okay, research a topic about this. So going to the library and finding that section of the library and knowing, okay, now I'm in this area of knowledge. And then finding the right chapter to find the exact, this is the author or whatever.
No, so that's where I'd say that is teaching contemporary kids skills that they're never going to use in real life.
Okay.
Right? But they need, so yes, it's helpful to understand how to use a library. I'm not saying that we shouldn't teach kids how to use a library. Fine. And go and find a chapter, find a book, what have you. But they need to learn how to use the internet, and they need to learn how to ask questions and filter it and understand what they're reading. I think that's the big thing, the comprehension. And until they have the comprehension, perhaps it's better if they use a resource that's been curated for them. So, like, for example, we have a huge number of very good textbooks around in New Zealand, Australasia, right? Like, people have worked in education for decades, and they get towards the end of their career and they go, I'm gonna put together a resource using all of my experience and all of my knowledge over the decades of teaching, and they slave over this book, right?
And it's
curated for a particular age group and for a particular level of comprehension, and it's curated in a way that guides students through the different stages of understanding that they need to go through in order to comprehend something that's more complex. And what I've noticed in education is a lot of teachers are moving away from using textbooks because of the new and the flashy. It's like, we have the internet. Look, we have access to everything. It's like, okay, but there is value in a textbook. So, that's why I think about it.
Though, does that mean that it's also a longer and maybe even harder process to make the teachers adapt? It's because I'm thinking two things now. Not a problem, but like, is it an issue? Is it something that we hit the head against the wall that like teachers would have to learn again how to teach using technology? And B, the ones who are learning now, the ones who are going to university and preparing to be teachers, are they getting all these technological side of things to be ready to teach on a device? Because we just didn't mention that before, but the good tutors, if you want to even unpack that a bit more, it's a system that is based on mainly on textbooks, right? On hard copies. You can talk about that more. But I'm just thinking about like what's making this process harder to use the technology to make it easier, because it was supposed to be easier, wasn't it? It's supposed to be faster, because the hard copy will be harder to update or to make a change when the computer is just like, here we go, updated, new.
Yeah, and so, I mean, there are there are programs obviously where content has been curated, right? And someone will develop an app. And for example, in my teaching career, I've used a program called Money Time, and it's a series of lessons that teaches kids financial literacy. So somebody's gone through that process of curating the information, putting it into a format that is easy to understand for children and what have you. So yes, there are things like that that are great. I think, with the use of textbooks, if you start there and kids get that good foundation, and then you add to that, you add some of these other apps, because there are very useful apps. I mean, you guys would have heard of ChatGPT, right?
No, I don't know ChatGPT.
Yeah, you did. Taylor told
Was that the one I did?
OpenAI, yeah.
Oh, that guy. That was insane.
Okay, so, I mean, that's a game changer too, right? Because now you don't even have to know anything except how to ask a question, right? And you can have this thing spit out a complete essay or a complete explanation. But again, that is useful as a tool if you know how to use it. But it's destructive for a child's learning if they are going to get that to do the work for them.
When I used that the first time, I eventually worked out, I asked it to compose a piece of music for me in the style of Randy Newman, but Eddie Van Halen would be the special guest guitarist on the track. Can you please write the notation tablature for the guitar part? Within a minute, it had like a 6-page essay. It had the guitar parts written, the harmony, talking about the lyric styling. It gave me example lyrics that fit the way he speaks across several albums or across his career. And I understood all of it. It was incredible. I was like, wow, this is fascinating to read. But I could not think of any person at school that I teach at, that would even be 5-6 years playing an instrument. They would not be able to comprehend the decades, the lyrical stylings, the types of harmony, and all of that at one time. And I asked, it was a silly question, but it was interesting. 4 pages within a minute, less. It was of no use. And yet it was amazing.
The thing is, ChatGPT is the first of its kind that's been open to the public. And we're still in the we talked about the internet and in its fledgling infancy. Well, AI is there at the moment, and the question is not where it is, where is it now? The question is, where is it going to be in 10 years or 15 years? I think that we will get to the point where AI will be able to do a huge number of things that put a lot of people out of jobs. Like, I think that you will get to the point where you'll ask AI to write you a curriculum, and it will do it. And when they bring on video on board as well, you'll probably get to the point where AI will be like Star Trek, where you're standing in a bowl and the computer is teaching you and you're asking it questions and it's responsive, and it gets where you're going.
I wonder, because there was always that thing of like, the army uses technology that is like 40 years ahead, right? I would listen to that quite often. But nowadays you see like kids running the show, like young people breaking into systems and banks and computers, so it's even hard to guess like, probably they released ChatGPT because they have much more behind the scenes, and you're like, I'm not even sure, because every day there's something fresh, there's something new that people are coming up with. So it's interesting to see.
Just thinking the army's 40 years ahead and Chinese just used a hot air balloon.
Well,
I don't know. I didn't mention which army.
I mean, who knows how advanced things are that we don't know about, but I know that Elon Musk, who he was one of the founders of ChatGPT, of OpenAI, he went to Congress and went to the president on a number of occasions, warning them about the dangers of AI because of how advanced it is and how advanced it will become and how quickly it will become that advanced. And so he's been speaking to everybody that he can, who will listen to him, to share that. So, and he would know, right?
I wanna throw something there to stay on the conversation, but to see it from a different perspective. You're a man of faith, right? You're a religious person. Mm-hmm. On the bio, I read something about the network church.
Yep.
that I wanna hear more about it. But like, just to stay in this conversation, how is it for someone who's got faith, who believes
Yep.
in God, to see robots, to see things doing crazy things, and like how Michael goes to bed and think about these things when, you know?
Well, I suppose I view it as, you know, like if you want to talk about that in terms of science, right? Like, what is science? Well, science is discovery. Discovery of what? Discovery of something that was already there, right? So, as a, you know, you say a religious person, I would say, well, I think that it's amazing that God created all of this stuff for us to discover. I mean, isn't it incredible how seamlessly the world works and how we are able to manipulate our environment to create things that we can use?
Does it mean we shouldn't fear them?
Fear.
Does it mean that we shouldn't fear what's coming up because it's a God's plan? Maybe it's something that is already planned out, or that's not actually the...
What do you mean?
Well, because like if it's already out there, and if it's God's creation, and God wants the best for us, or that's not how it works. I don't know, man, because I'm not a religious person. I just.
But you were raised Catholic, right?
I was.
So I'm sure you got some religious education.
I was not listening to it much.
You were there for the
I did
juice.
I did get a little bit, but like I think I lost interest.
Mm-hmm.
It was just not communicating to me the same way that all the things that I was inclined at the time with music and more artistic stuff. Like it didn't resonate. That's why. So and that's something that maybe you can enlighten me with that.
What would you say was the reason why you lost interest, or maybe a better way to say that is, what was it that you were expecting that it didn't provide?
I think it was because it was put on me. You know,
Yeah.
like I had to go to the Catholic school,
Yep.
and there was just a thing that you would do on Sundays, and that you would just go and repeat the words. And then I'm like, why? I think I was just questioning something that I was told
Yeah.
to do.
It's interesting, you know, because being a Christian, you know, I read the Bible, and I read in the Bible the Gospels and the way that Jesus dealt with the religious leaders of his time. And I find it fascinating that Jesus accepted all kinds of people, and he only really had severe words with the religious leaders, the ones who were supposed to be the representatives of God, if you will, right, at the time, the Jewish leaders and rabbis, Pharisees. And I mean, he gave them a hard time, and he would address some of these issues. Like, for example, you talked about repeating prayers. You know, he made it very clear. He said, if you're going to pray, don't do it out on the street corner like the hypocrites. You know, they do it to be seen. They do it for the accolades. He said, go into a quiet place. Do it privately, right? Do it between you and God. And then, you know, so he really nailed them on some of that religious stuff. And I think that there is a distinction that needs to be drawn there between, well, at least from my perspective, religion and our relationship with God.
Right. Do you want to put something there in the pot, Taylor?
I
Fabian,
suppose for me that my going out of was I started asking questions, and every answer that came back through the church made zero sense when under scrutiny.
Yeah.
Like even to the point where if it was ever to be, Jesus said this, and I'd be like, okay, well, I think Mark was the earliest gospel written. Biblical scholarship says 40 years after his death, in a world where there was almost nobody could write, and so it was all oration
Well, you know, the Jewish people were very literate. It was a hallmark of their culture.
But still, like you have the science, like the Chinese at the time had science and universities and scholarship, but most of the place there, most people did not go and study. Some people may have had scholarship, but the people that built the body of it, it's like saying 40 years ago, well, for us it's 2040 years ago, but someone wrote a book, Mark, 40 years after these events happened, to be able to say confidently, Jesus said X, Y, and Z to these people who lived 40 years ago we could talk about, and that we would feel comfortable stating, this person said this 40 years ago. I've never met them, and I've probably never met anyone who's met them. And that's sort of where I got to the point going, how could any of this be taken as there may well be truths, there may well be stories that were authentic events in history all through it. But for a book that was written at a time where not many people, not the majority of the population could read, 40 years later and then 100 years later, some of these people that wrote stories about what exactly happened and wrote dates. The Sermon on the Mount, how on earth could you say word for word someone's speech that you were never at? And then 2,000 years later, and it's been translated into so many times and there's so many revisions. I got to the point where there's like 50 different versions of the Bible. And it's so much easier to simply go, let's look at it from a completely non-religious perspective, and I found better answers.
Okay, so couple points. First of all,
so that's just how I was about 19, 20.
Yeah. So there's a couple things there that. The first is, you're talking about, what are you talking about?
I did years, 40 years later, verbatim, Jesus' words.
Okay, so if you were to establish something in court, how would you do it?
Establish?
So you're in court and you're trying to establish that an event happened. And
as in,
and you
on
don't
the date
have
of this date, I spoke to this person, this was the weather.
Yeah, so, you don't have, say, forensic evidence per se.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you establish a factual basis to work from that could be deemed by a court to be accurate and judged as accurate?
You're going with witnesses and testimony.
So you might be surprised to learn this, but there is more evidence that Jesus was who he said he was, and that the biblical account of his birth, death, resurrection occurred than there is that Caesar was alive and the events around what happened with Caesar.
I've never had that demonstrated to me before in any conclusive way.
There was a guy. It's funny. This has been a few people, but there was a guy whose wife became a Christian. He was a investigative journalist, and he went out to disprove the Bible because he was so upset that his wife had become a Christian, and he ended up becoming a Christian because he proved to himself, at least through his own investigation, that the Bible was accurate, and on that basis he believed.
And then I suppose the other thing was the billions of people in the history of time that were wrong before 2,000 years ago, after humans haven't been around for 100,000 years, suddenly going, you know what, maybe I'll send someone. I'll send me. And then he sends himself. Like, for 98,000 years, the world was ending in death for everyone, and continued to end in horrible death until modern science came in and gave us toothbrushes.
Yeah, I suppose your view of when Christ came in terms of in history, and your opinion about that, not you, but just in general, is impacted by your understanding of what he did by his coming. So, for example, with the death of Jesus, the whole point there was to redeem humanity.
I understand that.
But the event, the consequences of the event stretched forwards and backwards in the timeline. So, you're talking about a lot of people that came and died before him. I think what he did...
Well, based on a promise, and then he fulfilled the sacrifices or fulfilled the prophecies that validated things back in time. As in the prophets in the Old Testament said X, Y, and Z would happen, and then they all died in horror and pain and getting destroyed. Jesus comes along, he fulfills that prophecy. They didn't die in vain. Retrospectively, it was fine.
What's your understanding of why Jesus came, both of you? Like, what is your understanding of it? That's probably a good place to
Well,
start.
the way that I see when I started to detach from religion and I saw him as a person, I saw him as a cool guy like many others that came and was paying attention to the people who were suffering, like, because from what I got, he helped a lot of people, the homeless, like he would have a chat, he would take people to a safe place and to have a conversation. So like I was actually feeling that we were doing a disservice for someone who was good, for being humble, and for being nice at a time that like people were not being nice, and he was treating people with kindness. So like that image of a kind man made much more sense than actually a saint, someone with like the power to do like miracles and all that stuff. I was like, oh, cool. Jesus deserves respect without a doubt, because the same way that we had Gandhi and amazing humans who show up every now and then.
Yeah.
And I think on every corner we'll have a good Jesus, like someone doing cool stuff. It just got me the thing with the inexplicable in a human perspective. That was very hard for me to understand. Fabian?
Rhyme with the question.
So this is, your understanding of why Jesus came.
Oh, sort
Okay,
of the original sin type thing.
I'm taking it as an assumption here that, for the sake of the conversation, you accept that he was who he said he was. So
I don't,
what,
in that sense. So
I know, but I'm
so
asking
assuming
what. Yeah. So just for
assuming
this,
the story is correct, what was his role in the narrative?
yeah, sure.
By his death, he was the sacrificial lamb, the Lamb of God. So he was the human sacrifice of all human sacrifices that ended the need for punishment. And he would redeem people from there on. I guess that was his role.
Okay.
Because he was murdered by himself.
And why couldn't have been somebody else or something else?
Inexplicable for me.
Okay.
Because we put that on the Jewish people? Is that right?
He
Is
was
that the
Jewish
stuff?
himself, yeah. So the Jewish people killed one of their own.
Yeah, so, I mean, the Bible is basically a story of Jesus, including the Old Testament, because, the entire Old Testament points to Jesus and
The Jewish people disagree, but
yeah, well, except
assuming you're part of it.
for the Messianic Jews. I mean,
Yeah.
we can get there, but the Old Testament essentially points to Jesus, right? And establishes the need for Jesus. So, if you think about the story starting with Abraham, who was Abram, right? The Bible says, God came and made a covenant with this man, Abram, that God would essentially rescue the world through his lineage, right? And obviously his lineage ends up being the nation of Israel, or the Jews, right? And we fast forward, the nation of Israel is in captivity in Egypt. They come out of Egypt, they get rescued, right, by Moses. You would know that story.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. They end up in the wilderness and they say, right, we've been rescued, give us the law, right? Give us the law, we'll obey the law, and then we'll be all good.
I think go for a walk.
Yeah, so God gives them the law, right? They have the 10 Commandments, that's part of it, obviously, but there's, like, the whole book of Leviticus is law, right? So God's like, all right, and you want the law? Okay, here you go. And gives them this huge burden that they cannot possibly bear. And they realize, and this is the story of why humanity needs redeeming. They realize, in order to meet this standard, I mean, basically we can't meet the standard that's God set. He set the bar too high. It's impossible. And that is
inconvenient.
Well, that is everybody's story. Because as Christians we say, well, everybody, no matter who it is, has fallen short of God's standard. Well, what's God's standard? Well, perfection, right? God's standard is
Oh man, so AI is gonna ruin us pretty bad. We're doomed.
We're not going to meet
We
perfection.
deserve it. Suffer.
no. Well, if the standard is perfection, everybody's fallen short. Then basically, we all need saving from the consequences of our imperfection. Right now, we can call that sin, which literally means to miss the mark. It's actually an archery term.
Man, so like, so is that a thing? Is that a belief? I don't want to stay there for too long, but like, is that a belief from the Christian doctrine? Is that the word? That the Jews are still paying for what they've done to Jesus? Is it a thing? Because
No.
like if no.
No, so you got to understand, the whole reason why the nation of Israel has been preserved through the ages was to bring Jesus, right? So Jesus had to come through the line of Abraham. So the nation of Israel has been preserved and blessed through the ages so that Jesus could arrive and so that he could be the perfect sacrifice on behalf of humanity. Because the Bible says God loved the world so much that he didn't want a single person to perish. And he sent his only son to be the atoning sacrifice that then brings everybody back into relationship with God the way it was intended to be originally.
But someone had to do it. Someone had to.
And the only
Yeah,
person-
that to me just
Jesus-
doesn't work. Yeah,
So-
that's where I'm going from there. It doesn't work.
So the only person that's qualified is somebody who's without sin. That's why it had to be Jesus.
No, he had a hissy fit. He turned over the tables. He got angry at people.
What makes you think being angry is sin?
Ah. So those buggers at school, they're not sinners. They're just angry.
I mean, you can be you can be angry and sin, but I think you can be angry and not sin.
Yeah, fair
Michael,
enough.
when you said something cool before, and I was thinking about that. The thing with leaders that Jesus disapproved, is that a good word for it? Like he didn't think that there was a big need for leaders for the
market day. Well, market day in the temples, yeah.
Well,
So
selling.
how does that impact our life nowadays when we have many different churches, many different religious leaders?
yeah, I mean, I don't think we have many different churches, and maybe this is semantics, but the Bible talks about the church, and then what you're talking about would be denominations.
Okay, denominations, yes.
And the denominations are obviously groups of people who have faith, who have a different take on various aspects of Scripture. So, there are certain elements of Scripture that people view differently. One group will say, well, we think it's like this, and another group will say, well, we disagree, we think it's like this, and that's where you get denominations. But it's interesting because the apostles, like Paul writes at one point, and he says you guys are missing it if you're talking about denominations, because some people were like, well, I'm of the Christian stream that Paul preaches, and another group were like, well, we're of Peter, and it became this thou art holier situation where there was this comparison between these two people, and Paul has to correct that, and he says, no, you guys are missing it, we're all of Christ, right? End of story. Stop it with the denominational stuff. But I understand in the modern context why we've ended up with different denominations, because if you absolutely cannot agree on a particular point, and the point is significant, and it's like they're mutually exclusive, it's like if you believe that it's just totally incompatible with the alternative opinion, you can understand why people would then congregate with other people who have a similar belief, right? Because that's just human nature. It's birds of a feather flock together, right?
I always wonder, because for me, it feels like, in a way, it put us apart.
For sure.
In a world that we should be getting together.
Yeah.
Every time that one religion or denomination says that the other one doesn't make much sense, or there's a conflict, that's when I feel bad. I'm like, isn't it killing the purpose of being one as a nation?
Well, that's why I said at the beginning, just before I said, there's only one church. Because when in the Bible, all the writings refer to the church. And what is the church? Well, it's those people who have been baptized into Christ. That's the church.
It's the other religions then that aren't accounted for. So the Nordic, the Māori, the Aboriginal religions, all the religions. There are thousands of religions that are completely incompatible. Timeline stories, creations, characters, narrative types. They are not the same, and they're completely different. And some are older. The Egyptian, and that say the Judeo-Christian one is so similar to the religions of the time that it sort of mapped on perfectly, that it was the right mix of ingredients to get the right meal. That everyone goes, yeah, I can deal with that. But Muslims are not Christians. Jains are not Christians. Buddhists are not Christians, and they're very, very different. How does it fit into the picture of... Because the Bible says this, but the Bible is one book. Well...
I think that's where I was going. Yes, thank you.
So the book that's 2,000 years old, but before then, it's at the same time as then, and since then, our new religion. So Latter-day Saints will have the exact same claims and stories and histories and scholarship and debate and factions within their own thing. How could you respond to them having that discussion, which would be almost verbatim, if you'd never said Christian church, and you simply put in Church of the Latter-day Saints or Mormons or Scientology, and then you simply go, cool, apply exact same conversation. How could that be responded to?
Yeah, so, I mean, from my perspective, Christianity is the most inclusive religion there is, because if you go and you read through like the New Testament, right, what we see is that whilst the death and resurrection of Jesus opened up salvation to the Jews, they very quickly realized that it wasn't just to the Jews. And this was prophesied in the Old Testament as well, that it would extend out to everybody. And so we see Cornelius, who's a Gentile, in other words, not a Jew, and his house becomes Christian. And basically from that point on there, they start to realize, this, God's opening this up. It's not just Jews. It's not exclusive. This is for everyone. But the question is, well, if it is absolutely essential that Jesus died for our sins, and that it's through belief in Jesus and what he did in his death and resurrection, etc., right? If it's belief in that we receive salvation because of what he did, then of course, there is an element there where you have to say, well, whilst Christianity is open to everybody, the Bible makes it quite clear Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And it says, black and white, nobody comes to the Father except through me. This is Jesus talking. And so when you understand...
So a Hindu person that has never had that experience...
Yeah.
So central India, it's nice and hot, and there is very well established Hindu nature through the families, and they never come across it.
Yeah.
Because I still feel like it didn't answer that thing of a non-Christian group does not have those words. They have their own version. And it would
so
be
I guess what you're saying is
meaningful.
Like what you're saying, if I'm right, is other religions worship God. And they
a being or beings.
Okay. And what you're saying is, hey, it might be the same God. They just they have a different name for it. Is that, am I on the right track there?
I think because Hinduism has endless, there are many religions that have many different gods. And then I think different religions would argue for like a god of nature, a god of this, a god of sky, a god of land. That does not tally to a god who watches, collates sin, wages war, and then uses himself to forgive his people. Like the narrative, if you went to, say, the Māori traditions, which before Christians came here were religion, they were the science, they were the body of knowledge, is completely incompatible with the Christian stories and messages. But of course, you can extract good morals from it, and you can extract good morals from most things.
Yeah. So
But no
I guess
way is
I guess
the
what
Jesus model in that sense.
Yeah, so I guess what you're wondering is, okay, let's say we're dealing with, okay, what happens when we die, right?
Sure.
And you've got all these other religions, right? And-
All of which I think are wrong in the sense that if they
Sure.
claim to know something about the laws of physics that can't be inquired by the cleverest people.
Okay.
So I'm not saying another religion is right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what I'm trying to
yeah,
put there.
yeah. So the question is, what happens from a Christian perspective for all of these other religious people? Is that a fair?
Yes, but also conversely, what happens to Christian people from the perspective of the Islam or the Hindi, like hellfire and rain type thing?
So, one thing that, well, what I believe and what the Bible says is basically, if nobody comes to the Father except through Jesus, then it's
They can't.
through Jesus. I don't know though, and it's not for me to judge who is going to be covered by what Jesus did and who isn't. Now, the Bible lays out a clear pattern for what it means to be a Christian and how to become a Christian. And it's essentially like, okay, you hear the gospel. This is the good news, right? And
I
then-
wish that was followed 800 years ago or 1500 years ago. All the wars that have ever happened based on Christianity. Because a lot of this argument, or it's not an argument, it's a discussion, a lot of the points about the goodness and things, I think we can have now. None of this discussion could have happened 1900 years ago, 1800, up till the last 60 years, 80 years.
Mm.
Like my grandparents were devout, they passed away now, and you do everything by them. So you have their Catholic funeral, you sing their hymns they love, you read the stories they loved, and that's, you respect their culture in every way because they're family and they're humans, you look after them. But this discussion could not have happened until millions of people were dead, slaughtered, raped, pillaged, burned, apostates were killed. If you, what's the word, proselytize? That's the word, isn't it? When you come in and you change a different faith to a faith, or a non-faith to a faith believer. Is that the word?
Proselytizing is preaching, if you will. Yeah.
Mm. So like having all this discussion about the message, I think the history, because this is when I was trying to answer all these questions when I was at uni, and I watched, Cardinal Pell have debates with these sorts of people, and you go, okay, well, this guy's the fifth in line to the popeship. He's the arch-cardinal. He passed away recently. All the greatest religious thinkers in the world you go through, and not one of them can give me a compelling argument, and none of them would answer things about, if we want to have this conversation about how good this particular religion is, and it's all the religions, there's blood behind you, or behind those ideas. There's mass death. To get to a point now, civilized societies come in place, I think generally through the Enlightenment and the pushing back of religious ideas for a more uniform structured society. I think I'm going to try and argue that, push back on it soon.
Well, there was the 20th century.
Well, of course, but God on our side was on the Nazi belts. It was literally his birthday, Hitler's birthday, was celebrated at the Catholic Church till 46, something like that. So the Catholic Church was entirely in support of and did not repudiate the actions of the Nazi Party.
It was a bit of a problem, wasn't it?
Wow.
I think I was thinking about that when I mentioned the Jews, because it was the thing, right?
God on our side was written on the uniforms.
Like as a punishment, right? There was something that the people, the Jewish were targeted because.
I suppose
think
what
there are
I'm
a lot of reasons. Yeah, the war had a lot of things.
I suppose what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of holding God accountable for the actions of men.
I think the actions of himself, to go, if he's all-powerful, omniscient, omnipresent, and set up the situation that is so ridiculously convoluted for so many thousands of years of human society, there could have been a better way that I think could be decided upon with a 10-minute brainstorm on a piece of paper. But
yeah,
now...
Job had this thought.
So Job?
Job, yeah, there's a whole book in the Bible, Job.
I thought you meant Job, and I was like, who the hell's Job?
No, so
bring him to the show.
So Job suffered tremendously, and he, the whole book is about this, and he questions God, and God responds with, "Can you hold the stars in your hand?" And Job goes, "No." And, there's an element of humility where we have to say, well, we might not understand everything that God does, but we also are not in a position to judge him. I mean, if you think about, let's say, this coaster here represents all of human knowledge, and you were to say, well, how much do I know? I mean, well, it's probably just a tiny little speck on that square. But then if you were to say, well, what about all knowable knowledge, all knowledge that exists, and that includes what humans don't even know that they know? Well, now we're looking at a much, much larger section of knowledge. And then if we were to say, well, based on my tiny little speck of understanding, I'm going to judge God, I don't know. I don't think we can do that.
You know what I was thinking, just to change a little bit direction, but it's still to stay there. What's your take when it comes to because again, we were talking about education, and this seems to be such a relevant thing, because there are a lot of discussions on should the government be if I use the right word, LAIC, which means a body of power that doesn't have beliefs, right? Is that the word? I'm pretty sure. The schools should be
So state governed, non-religious based.
Yeah, non-religious. And do you think we miss out because then there's also the elements of culture, especially in a country like New Zealand, Aotearoa, when we have the traditions, you have Maori traditions, we know, we go through cultural practices that involves so how do we start to merge these things when it comes to humanity of what we hold as culture, what we hold as belief, what should be passed on, what should not, if we're going to do this, why are we doing that? So how do you guys see those mergers of things that humans have?
Can I hold that for a second and come back to the coaster analogy, because I liked it?
You like the coaster?
So
Yeah.
for those of you listening on the Altbays platforms, we have these lovely quarter patterned coasters or stingrays, or etc. So I would argue that when the religions came out, and there were many that came out, when religion came out, the body of knowledge was a tiny speck and all of it was God. And then in the last 300 years, all the knowledge that we found out has not been God. So everything that we thought we knew, and that the God knowledge was actually very small. We found out about bacteria. We found out about how weather works and the stars and the shape of our planet.
I think science points to God, not away from him.
But I'll just finish my point here. So that this coaster keeps growing, or the table keeps growing, but I'd say it's never grown to include a religious picture. It's simply whatever was claimed to be reality from the early version of scientific query, which I think religion was. It's simply been, oh, yes, you know this, but you can't explain that, then that's God. And then that was filled in with molecular biology. Oh, yeah, but you know that you don't know the next bit, none of that's God. Oh, no, you look even smaller, and there's smaller parts, and we can explain and demonstrate and test and use it to make cell phones work and ping to things in space. And so that every bit of knowledge that's grown has never once, I'm going to argue it, I put it down here, what am I on, Facebook? Put it out here, TikTok.
YouTube.
Of the last 300 years of body of knowledge that's grown in the sciences, the technologies, literature, cultural practices, none of it has pointed to religion. It's simply filled in the gaps that were previously held by. There you go. So let your comment, send your emojis through to me.
My perspective on that is that everything that we've discovered validates the Bible.
Ooh, how so?
Well,
yeah.
I mean, a lot of people have tried to disprove the Bible, and they've tried to do it through science. They've tried to say, we're going to investigate this and that, and, we're going to prove that event that's recorded in the Bible didn't happen. Everything that they discover validates the Bible as historically accurate.
I don't know if it's true, because I think, was it Paul and Peter both have different dates for events of death and resurrection of Jesus. So I think they literally have the different day, and they both go into a lot of detail. So that's a contradiction in itself. But I think this conversation is drawing to a stalemate.
Yeah, because I don't know. You can always argue that the unknown You know, like how do we define that? Like, if you believe in something, you can say that that's what it is, and you can put the point of like, how do you prove that?
Well, I think what we're dealing with is a question of faith, and ultimately, you know, I have a lot of stories that I could tell you about things that I've seen, experienced, and secondhand accounts of reasons that validate my belief. But none of those are going to be persuasive to you, probably, because you need to take a step of faith in anything. I mean, what I'm trying to say is any claim to knowledge at all, whether you're dealing with science or whether you're dealing with a religious belief, is a faith statement. And at some point, you have to take that leap of faith based on your very limited experience. You know, back to that coaster analogy, it doesn't matter how much you know and how much you find out. You can be the most learned man or woman on the planet, and at the end of it, you're still going to know nothing in comparison to what can be known. And so you will need to take a step of faith at some point to believe anything. I mean, I personally, I think that atheists have the greatest faith of all, but that's just my opinion. But I think everything is a faith statement, and I mean, you can prove that easily because everything that you believe, there are things that you take for granted in order to make that statement. Like you have to first of all believe that you are interpreting the world correctly.
So gravity, for example.
Well, how about your ability to perceive with your senses in a way that accurately reflects reality, which it doesn't. We all have a slightly different, you know, I mean, there are all kinds of foundational suppositions which we take for granted upon which we build our claims to knowledge. So all of it is a faith statement. I claim
saying the exact opposite. Every statement of faith is an attempt at trying to say something scientific.
That's why I like when people say that, like, if God exists, probably he doesn't care about what we think. At the end of the day, isn't it? Because like the way that I say, that's why like I don't like when people start to give too many denominations. But like I think by being an agnostic, you're saying that like you don't know, like how can you tell? You know, like, and I don't know if I would put myself in that group, but like I think in my Catholic upbringing and then becoming someone who would oppose religion, and nowadays like I have an open mind, and the more I talk to people, the more I realize that like the unknown is beautiful. Not knowing for me is amazing. You know, I'm fascinated about like how humans have this beautiful, and I'm intrigued by creativity. Mm-hmm. Creativity is something that really catches my attention, because like where does it come from? How do we develop that? So like if people like to believe that there's a powerful God or someone sending us message, I think it's cool, man. It's a cool story. I don't like when it starts to get into other people's lives, you know, like when you start to determine what they should do or how they should spend their money or whatever, like then I think it messes up with the faith elements. But I'm with you on that one. Like that thing with like wanting to believe in something, you know, like hanging yourself out there. Even that beautiful Rick Gervais movie, that The First Liar, that is the invention of religion or whatever. The invention of lying. Invention of lying. Like that his mom is about to die, and he goes and he tells a beautiful story so she doesn't die miserable, you know? Like even a guy who opposes, like he has that little thing of saying sometimes you tell someone a story or you like to believe in something, and it gives you that peace, you know? Like I find it interesting that you really go for that aspect of like, well, you cannot disprove, you know, like it is what it is. People tried, and I don't know from which perspective they're looking at it, but like I think it's also a bit mean to take people's faith out of the equation, you know, like because a lot of people live in such a like misery, you know, like they have hard lives, and then if you go and tell them that they should not have faith or they should not believe in something, it's a bit harsh. I don't know. Yeah, I mean a bit philosophical there, Fabian.
You know, for me, like I grew up in a Christian family. My parents were Christian, and as a young teenager, probably 13 or 14, I'd be in church and I'd be listening to, the pastor or preacher and listening to what was being said. And when you're young, you tend to accept things a little uncritically. And then as I got a bit older, probably 14.
This links to the good tutors, the kids being young. There's a formula that works for young. They'll take it on board, but don't think critically yet. Sorry, because I want to get back to the good tutors. I really want to round back to it.
Well, round back to it in a minute.
I want
to. So as you get a little bit older, you start to think critically about things and, hey, I don't know about this, Is this right? Is what he's saying true? I don't know. I'm going to think about this for myself, and I'm going to test it out for myself. So I think for me, my late teen years, were very much a searching period. But I remember that there was I don't know what you'd call it. It was like a visiting group of musicians, artists. They did theatre and there was a gospel message involved. And I went along to this thing, and I remember feeling like I listened to what they said. And, for the first time in my life, it was like, yes, that's true. And I responded to this call, hey, does anybody want to respond to this message? Do you want to become a Christian? I responded to that day. And it was an interesting thing because, again, I didn't know much back then, but I knew that I had to respond. And from that day, I'd say that would be the beginning of my faith journey. And I have collected over my life a variety of experiences and a variety of understandings, if you will, that have confirmed that decision that I made. Like I was saying before, I can't transmit those things to other people because it's like bricks in a wall, and in concert they create a very compelling case for me. But yeah, I mean, I've seen some stuff. So
good tutors. Tell me.
Yeah, I want to jump in good tutors. So, don't think so. Good tutors is a business that's starting up, but tutoring as supplementary. So alongside, of course, it's not a homeschooling system. There's tuition after school, weekends, or at certain point in times that will. Are you thinking that it'd be, what's the curriculum you're doing at school? Cool, here's how we'd teach those subjects, or here's how we can support you to understand your homework that was given or the learning? Or is it something that, here is what is appropriate at your age, that will not be the same curriculum strand or following your week by week, month by month at school? Is it running completely independent, but matching those topics? How's the educational rubric? What's the structure for it?
Every homeschooler or whether you're at school, you're going to have a curriculum. And the tuition company that we're starting, we intend to support whatever plan somebody has in place. So if the school is doing a particular topic, then we would work in with the school to support what they're doing and make plans around that. For homeschoolers, there's a lot more flexibility because you can, depending on the program that you're using, you can decide where to go with the learning. So we're open to creating more customized learning plans for people that are interested. Obviously, we're starting with math and English, and that's obviously where the greatest need is. I'm sure that you guys are aware, but our national stats are not looking too flash at the moment for numeracy and literacy, and they've been on the decline for some time. But I would like to see.
Sorry, why do you think that is happening?
Well, I don't think there's any one reason. There's probably lots of different things that are working together to cause that. Some of it is pretty obvious. I mean, we had significant disruption to the learning of children in the last 3 years with lockdowns and various things. And I think it's from my perspective, it's almost like children are in a state of post-traumatic stress. And the reason I say that is because, like, a lot of kids that I've spoken to and a few that I've taught, they appear to have no hope for their futures. Like, as if, hey, tomorrow's unpredictable. I don't know what tomorrow's going to look like, so I'm just going to worry about today. Yeah, it's a very short-term look on life, and it's the result of an event that has caused the future to become unpredictable. And I think
waiting for 1 o'clock the next day on the news. What's the update?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of kids are in this state still, where they're not sure if there's going to be another lockdown. They're not sure if there's going to be another pandemic. They're not sure if there's going to, they're just not sure. And so they're like, well, I can't think about tomorrow. I'm just going to worry about today. And, it's a real problem, because in all likelihood, those kids are going to be here in the coming decades, and they need to plan for their futures. And we need to get them back onto that bandwagon of learning, so that they can have a hope again for their future, so they can think, you know what, hey, that's right, I wanted to be a doctor. I'm going to work towards that. We need to find a way of getting kids back there. So yeah, the whole lockdowns, pandemic, and all that stuff has been a big impact on learning and on motivation. But there are other factors. There's various things that the current government have done, I'm sure, which have had an impact. Yeah.
Do you think there's going to be a big change now that Jacinda left? Are you hopeful about the changes that?
I'm hopeful. I have no idea. I mean, who knows what's going to happen. I hope things get better. But from my perspective, I'm not going to stand around and wait and see. That's why I'm looking at our community here in Whitianga, and I'm going, there's so much need in the community right now for some solid supplemental education. The school is trying really hard. They've been given a bad hand, and they're playing the hand as well as they can, I think. But I want to provide whatever I can to support the community, the kids, and give them the tools that they need to make the decisions, right? It's like I want to give them choice. And to have choice, you need to have an education, because it provides choice, right? It's like if you are literate and you have good comprehension, the world opens up to you. You can do whatever you want to an extent.
I try and explain to some of my students that, university may not be for you, but you get a degree, it unlocks everywhere in the world except Afghanistan, North Korea to you, basically. You can go almost anywhere and work and live comfortably with that ticket.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something else that a lot of kids need to think about. We're living in a very much a global economy now, and so it's not just that children at school are competing with other children at the same school. And it's not even that they're just competing within our nation. Our kids are competing on the national stage for jobs that will be taken by Germans and the Japanese and the Chinese and the Koreans and
AI.
And AI. Yeah. And so I think we need
sort of the idea, like a massive employer in the future will be Google. Okay, who's going to get these jobs at Google? Is it you, or is it someone that's
it's not even just
10% more motivated and pushed?
It's not even just jobs. I mean, you think about the innovation space, entrepreneurship. The people that are going to be the most successful are the people that get there first, that do the best job, right? That are the sharpest, the most well educated, the ones that can think critically and solve problems. Essentially, it's like, can you solve problems well? And it's like, to some degree, there are an infinite number of jobs. That's true, because there's an infinite amount of innovation that can take place. But there isn't an infinite amount of resources to distribute across the spectrum. And so, resources will be allocated to the best ideas. I think that New Zealand needs to wake up to that fact that we are in a competitive international market. And the people that are going to do well in the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades are the ones who are serious about their education now. Like I had a Korean girl, and anybody that's been my student has probably heard this story, but I had a Korean girl in my class. You know, she was year 8, and she was a fairly quiet girl, very respectful, you know, well-rounded personality-wise. She was not, she was well-rounded. And one day she didn't do her homework, and you know, and it was so uncharacteristic. And I pulled her up. I said, "Hey, what's the deal? You know, usually you get the homework done. You didn't do it this week. You know, something wrong?" She said, "Oh, look, I just had a really busy week this week. I'm sorry, I'll get it done." I said, "You know, oh yeah, you had a busy week. Okay, yeah, very sure. Tell me about your busy week." You know, I'm thinking that this is just an excuse. The dog ate my homework, right? I had a busy week. So she says, "Oh well, you know, Monday to Friday, I get up and I go to school, and when I get home from school, I have some afternoon tea, and then I go to after school." Oh, okay. And then I get home from after school and I do an hour of practice on my instrument, and then I have dinner, and after dinner I do a second hour of practice on my second instrument. And then I do a third hour of practice on my third instrument. How many instruments do you play? 5. Oh. And then after I've done all of that, I do my homework and I go to bed. And I said, "And you do this Monday to Friday?" "Yep, Monday to Friday." I said, "You know, what are your weekends like?" "Oh, they're busier." And what struck me is not the fact that she worked hard, because she worked hard. What struck me is how well grounded and well balanced she was, for considering the amount of work that she was doing. You know, and these days it's like we're not even giving kids homework. We expect them to get everything that they need to do done in the hours that they're at school.
Damn, Michael, I wouldn't survive in your world, man. I would be homeless. Can't keep up with taking notes. Imagine those hours of study. I'm just...
You see, like, I'd be the opposite, because I never did homework. I was given it, but I just did all my work in class at school and did everything that was asked of me. And then I just pissed off, and I was singing or dancing or acting or sport or socializing out of home, out of school, doing something. I did all right.
But before cracking this joke, I was actually thinking of like...
Was it a joke?
I respect that, but I was thinking like, what about the people who cannot even afford lunch? Like how, like I
So this is a real problem.
I understand people saying, you know, that the thing with competition and the world is competitive and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I understand, you know, like that we operate most of the countries in capitalism, and that's the system that it's winning, you know?
Yeah.
So competition is a thing, and then you give products like high-end stuff to some people, and then the people who cannot afford look up to them and like, I want that. So they find ways to have the thing, you know, like, so. Okay, so honestly, I see it as something that it's not going to work, but I see people trying their best to bring equity is the word, right? We talk so much about equality, but actually the word is equity.
I'm not a fan of
equity of opportunity.
You're not a fan of equity?
I'm not a fan of equity, because these days it typically means equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity.
Equality of outcome, not equality of...
Yeah, well, it's social justice. I think that has a lot to answer for as well, but that's kind of a big conversation.
So the idea, everyone should get all the opportunities they can possibly get their hands on, and it should be very evenly distributed. Everyone should get all the opportunities. But there's a reason why there's that specific spinal surgeon that is an expert. You cannot have everyone being spine surgeons of the highest possible order, because there's too much variety dispersed across the population. So equity of opportunity, everyone gets the chance to be whatever they would be best at, that they would enjoy most, be successful at. But equity, I think the term you don't want is everyone should be meeting this ridiculously high level that should be available. If it's available to them, it must be available to everyone. Everyone has to be an Elon Musk ability. And that's, I think, the misuse of the term.
Well,
a caricature of it anyway.
We could think about it in maybe an even more relatable term or a situation like, we hear a lot about quotas, you know, so in government we have gender quotas. So rather than saying, who is the best person for the job, pick them. Doesn't matter if they're a man or a woman. We say, well, there have to be a certain number of women and a certain number of men that fill the positions. It's like, okay, well, we're doing that at school. I remember, going through bias training at school, and the idea was this. It was like, unless we have equal representation, teachers are unconsciously biased and therefore racist and disadvantaging children whether they realize it or not. It's like, no, we're not. So, well, give us an example. Okay. I was told that, in level 2 biology, for example, it's like, okay, there's no Māori students. So therefore, obviously, we've discriminated against Māori and prevented them from accessing that opportunity. Like, well, no, because there aren't enough Māori in the school to have equal representation in every single subject and every single field. So, no, it doesn't work.
As in, if there's 100 students and there's only 3 Māori students, there can't be 5 Māori students in each of the 10 student classes.
Yeah.
So
but,
it's just by math.
What school was that? Was it a private school?
I won't say which school it was at.
Okay, was it a private school?
No.
Okay. Because the way that I see it is like when you see a quota thing, because that's very common in Brazil, you're just trying to do some sort of reparation of a people who lacked, is that a word? Who lack of opportunities, and when you give them quota, you're trying to catch up with a mistake and trying to bring them back on board. And then being the best stops from being like, oh, you have to be the best, which is always like, what is the best? The first place is always vulnerable. There's always someone to come and take that. So like, if you don't bring different people from different backgrounds to have an opportunity, like, isn't that the thing? Aren't you trying to bring more equality? Then I think the word equality makes sense.
The trouble is, it was one of the American presidents said, the 9 scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And it's like, when government interfere with some of these things, they inevitably make them worse. If anyone is interested, there's a very good book on this by Thomas Sowell, who is an African-American economist. He knows his stuff and he's done empirical research into it. And he shares a story about an area in America where what they noticed is that in the black communities over there, the corner stores and the dairies and shops and that, they were charging higher prices for their products compared with slightly more affluent neighboring communities. And the politicians at the time cried foul. They said, hey, this is a clear example of discrimination. We need to do something about that. We need to legislate a solution to this because these poor people are being taken advantage of. Well, as it turns out, what was causing the higher prices is higher costs, because these businesses that were operating in a lower socioeconomic area had to deal with theft and vandalism and a variety of other costs, right, that increased their cost of doing business. And so the government came in and mandated, well, you have to provide comparative pricing for your products, and we're going to hold you to it. Well, all these businesses, they went out of business. They couldn't actually run. And so...
Well, because they didn't go deeper.
Yeah,
they didn't go to the root of the problem. If there's crime, if there's...
Yeah, but that's my point. What we do, or what we tend to do, is we take a very complicated problem, right? Like disparity. And we say, well, we're going to solve it. Let's get our heads together. Right, we've come up with a solution. It's like, okay, you've come up with a single univariate solution to this really complicated problem. The probability that you're going to make it worse is like 99.9%. And so, like, I don't deny that there is like inequality and problems, and you were talking about, what about the kid that doesn't have something to eat? It's like these problems exist, and they are problems, and nobody's denying that. But the question is, what do you do about it? I think, and it's not a comfortable thing, because we want to fix it quickly, right? We want to say, okay, we're going to throw money at it and it will fix it. It's like, no, it won't. It's like the people that win lotto, right? They're poor again within 5 years because they don't know how to manage money. They haven't learned those skills. They get a sudden, a boost of wealth and they don't manage it and it's gone. So it's like throwing money at a problem doesn't solve it. You have to have a very well thought through solution.
It's interesting, the idea of throwing money at something and solve it. I think one of the 0.01 where that might work is throwing money at education. Because if you can increase resources, increase the higher demand for people to work harder to make it a more prestige. The idea of, because I think you talked about as the good tutors being able to look at ideas for subsidizing, not saying for free, but for subsidizing. If you need help and it's difficult, cool. Subsidizing, so you still have to work for it, but
I don't want it to be free though.
Again, that's the thing. So you got to meet somewhere at a place where it matches and it can work.
What's the problem with being free? Why education shouldn't be free?
Because you value more highly what costs you.
But if you can afford it, if you cannot, if it's someone who cannot afford it,
I'm sure that there is a case to be made for
if there's a big community, if it's a big I'm not saying specifically about good tutors. Now I'm just going on the point of education should cost. I'm 100% against that. Okay,
no, I'm with you, but my perspective is this: if I make something free, right, then people who are not invested put their hand up and say, "Yeah, I'll get that for my kid," right? Okay, so now somebody's paying for that child to learn. Who's holding them accountable to the learning? Because the parent's not invested. It's not costing the parent a thing. So I think there needs to be a cost. Now, I don't want to see people paying huge sums of money, but let's say, okay, one-on-one tuition is like $65 an hour. That's kind of the going rate, right? And one of the things that we're doing through Good Tutors is we're taking small groups of kids, maybe between 2 and 4 kids, $46 an hour, okay? But between 5 and 7 kids, so this is a slightly larger group, but still small, manageable. Between 5 and 7 kids, $26 an hour. Okay, so right off the bat, that's manageable for a lot more people than a $65 fee. Now, if we can get support from other agencies, from the government, from non-profit trusts, charities, and we can say, you know what, let's subsidize those rates further. If we could get them down to $15. Now, to say that no family can afford okay, there might be the odd family that can't afford $15 a week, but I think they'd be few and far between. The point is that it's like, if something costs you, you're invested and you value it. It's like, hey, Johnny, how are you going with the tutoring? Oh, you're mucking around? I'm paying for that. Pull up your socks, right? There's an accountability there that comes with being invested. So
with the privates, I'm fine with what you say, all the privates and people wanting to go for more specific things or topic, but in my view, education, access to information, it should be free. That's why there's the great rap from KRS-One that all the knowledge that he's got was in the libraries. He just learned how to find. Like we were talking about at the start of the show, when you know how to find what you need, you ask the right questions, and that access should be free, should be open for everyone.
And in New Zealand, education is more or less free. But again, we're talking about sort of an imperfect situation where there are needs that are additional to what is currently being provided for, and whilst in an ideal world, it would be free. Nothing's really free because somebody's paying for it,
And again, it's like I said earlier, schools in New Zealand that have all been affected are playing the hand they've been dealt. This could be something to alleviate a bit of the stress, but it will come at some sort of cost because you've got to make a living and there'll be tutors and expertise. One thing I do think that comes to your point, Leo, is that education is pretty much free because it comes out of everyone's taxes. Now, if everyone in New Zealand went, you know what, I'm happy to pay 2% more tax on everything I earn, and that does not impact the current tax system at all, but that additional 2% goes entirely to educational resources. So, nice desks, no holes in your
Resources.
carpet, resources, being able to buy good devices with good programs and pay good tutors good money to make it an appealing profession for younger people, because it's obviously an aging population in teaching. So if we want the more modern stuff, do we want young people going, yeah, I could be a teacher? So, the idea of it not being free, no, it's not free, it's tax. It comes out of tax, and so it does cost everyone. But I think everyone goes, that's worth it. We absolutely think it's worth it. Same, we want roads. Like, roads should be free. Oh, fine, okay. Dirt roads are free. Okay. Now you need a car that can drive on a dirt road at your own expense, and then it's not equitable anymore. So the tax system was an equalizer of some significant hope. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
I think so.
Mr. Roberts. We're gonna have to wrap it up. We should
been a long
bring
show.
Michael back and do like per topics, because we have a lot to chat about. I'm glad you.
I would love to come back.
Plus, I want to
Yeah.
hear about 6 months' time, good tutors. How's it evolving? Because I think we said before the show, whatever we say here, what happens in 3 years? Is it still true? Maybe.
That's the beauty of podcasts.
Capitalism.
We can always chat again, right?
It'll be $600 an hour in 3 years, won't it?
There you go. Yay! Thank you so much for doing this, man.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Nice. So, how do we find good tutors?
So our website is goodtutors.co.nz. And if you want to send us an email, it's info@goodtutors.co.nz.
Covering the Coromandel for now.
Yeah, so we're just launching in Whitianga, and obviously we intend to expand. We want to cover Coromandel all the way down to Whangamata. I've had multiple people get in touch with me who are interested in tutoring in various areas. So that's great. The more tutors that come on board, the more areas we can service. But yeah, ideally, I want to see the kids in this community get access to education. So if you're a parent and you value education, give us a call.
There you go. Thanks, Mr.
like it.
Roberts.
Thank you very much. And if you're a family that want a good night out, including dessert, blue ginger, new dessert menu.
That's right. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Taylor. And we're back on Thursday, because now we're live every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. So who is coming on Thursday? Thai Collective, beautiful couple from Matarangi who just released a Maori coloring book. And they're cool people. We're going to have a good conversation. I'll see you on Thursday. Peace. Ciao.